Hi, I'm Amy Toby. I'm Senior Principal Engineer for Digital Interconnection at Equinix. And today I have with me Kelsey Hightower. Kelsey, I understand this is your first KubeCon, so why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself and your career and your experience here at your very first KubeCon?
Yeah, my first KubeCon was actually the first KubeCon. A lot of people may not know me and two other people helped create KubeCon before the CNCF existed. And so this is probably my 15th KubeCon, maybe 20th, depending.
Yeah, I was only off by 14.
Off by 14. And so it's good. I mean, lots of people are here for the first time, their actual first time. And all seeing these new logos, companies that weren't here just 2 years ago are here now. And I see them filling in the gaps.
Yeah.
Right? Cloud native is amazing, but as you know, that have been doing this for a while, there's a lot of gaps in between the software layer, the actual hardware, and things like network and storage. So to see all those gaps getting filled is pretty dope.
Yeah, it really is. And there's a ton of complexity there. And just each of those things you mentioned, the storage, the authentication, all of those things, it really did take, 15 years. This hasn't been that long, but a long time to develop. So which one do you feel like is like the most mature today?
Honestly, I think the nice thing about when I think about Kubernetes as someone who's kind of contributed to it, seen it evolve over time, the lens I've taken is that storage has been mature for a long time, but maybe not inside of Kubernetes. Networking has been mature for a long time. So is the operating system that sits underneath most Kubernetes clusters, Linux, for example. But I think what we've been doing the last 10 years is really giving APIs to that world. It is complex, but I think a lot of us have been lying about this complexity for a long time. Puppet, Chef, Ansible, all of those bash scripts. And we just made it work through brute force. But now I feel like going from a dynamic programming language to one that has types, now there's a network type, there's a storage type, load balancer type. And I think Kubernetes has been giving infrastructure a type system.
I like that angle a lot. I think that enables a lot of new solutions, which, going back to what you said, all these new products that have shown up. But maybe it starts to approach I remember back when Mesos was the thing, we talked about like the data center operating system. But maybe that's kind of where we're finally starting to arrive, is like there's a full suite of these APIs that are mature.
Yeah, I think the cloud has been the thing. And when you think about the data center, most people don't think about ping, pipe, and power anymore, right? You go online, click a button, and a physical server comes to life, and here are your SSH credentials. And I think that analogy of the data center being the computer, but then what's its operating system?
Right.
And I think that part where we didn't agree. Some people thought it was just like Linux, but a lot of them.
Right.
And now Kubernetes is like, well, how do we take all of those pieces and give it a new operating system? And I do feel like the North Bridge, the RAM, the CPU, the sound card, if you need one, has been extracted over now.
Mm-hmm.
And Kubernetes has become that front door to the computer being the data center.
Yeah, I really like that. So, I mean, I guess I'll shift a little. What's your favorite innovation in the last year or so?
I don't know if I'm seeing innovation. I think I'm seeing progress.
Progress.
Yeah, I think for me, like, innovation is like things we've never seen before in my book. Like, it's like a leap of like, wow, I didn't know that was possible.
Right.
But I think after 25 years seeing like, yo, the network can be programmable.
Yeah. That's kind of what I mean by innovation though, right?
Okay.
We could build networks before.
Evolution.
We could do data centers of computers that worked similarly before with the config management tools.
Watching people go from SharePoint to open policy agent is a big step forward. So people had rules like, these apps shall never talk to these apps under these conditions. And it's just this written rule, and they will catch you in a quarterly audit if you are not doing that. Now we're taking that same thing and serializing it into a config that says in real time, thou shalt not do those things, because you can't.
Right.
It's now baked into the platform. So to me, I think all the tools that do that, whether it's open policy agents, Cilium at the network level,
right,
L4, Envoy and Istio with service mesh, Kubernetes itself making sure things run in the right place. I think now the fact that we have a way to serialize the decisions that we make, whether they're security related, compliance related, or just someone that wants to deploy an app, we finally have an outlet to serialize that decision into the platform itself. And I think that is just available to the 10% of the people who get it.
Right.
This conference is filled with people looking at that for the first time and asking themselves is like, is this real?
Yeah.
Is this the way we're going to be doing it going forward? So I think that's where we are.
Well, I think that serialization really kind of brings the latency down, or the turnaround time, right? And so that experience is now automatic and instant, as opposed to we could do it before, but you had to go plug in the cables. You had to have people go and configure the ports, right? And now you call an API and a bunch of that policy is applied inline automatically, instead of like having to wait for people to do it. And now your business is moving faster, your teams are moving faster, and we're having higher velocity.
Yeah, it's like standard libraries. Like to implement HTTP by reading the RFC is hard, and you're going to make mistakes.
Yeah.
But when you can just go to your standard library and import the HTTP package, and just call another endpoint, that feels like all the things we've learned as a community gets checked in as a standard library. In some ways, Kubernetes and the ecosystem that surrounds it has become the infrastructure standard library.
It really has, in a lot of ways, in my experience. And I think that I really like that part you just pointed out about how we're encoding this knowledge about the complexity of our world into APIs and code, which is maybe the big shift forward, because even the config management tools tried to do this early, but we didn't know what we were doing. We were guessing, to be really honest. And I think maybe some of the Puppet Chef folks would disagree with me on this.
Well, I used to work at Puppet for a number of years. Before joining Puppet Labs as an engineer, I used to use it in production. And I think the thing that I realized at that point was Puppet was trying to put an API where one wasn't. So you SSH to a server, there's yum, there's init files, and they were just loosey-goosey. And then you get Puppet that says, hey, here's this language that tries to create a service. And you can say service start without understanding the difference between systemd, init, sysb, and all these things. And I think for a lot of people, we got stuck on scripting, and we made a bunch of scripting platforms, and we called it DevOps.
Yeah.
And the next generation showed up and said, yo, there's a difference between automation and abstraction.
Right.
Let's delete these scripts and take this container image instead. And I think that was a transformation for a lot of people. And it's not like we made a new operating system. Those containers still call the same syscalls.
Right.
But the big difference here is that abstraction beats automation. If I can delete 5,000 lines of bash scripts and turn it into one API call, that's progress. And I think that's the part where I don't think we're going to go backwards from that.
I don't think so either. So that implies kind of a future where there's these API, we're going to continue to go down this road of automating things through APIs and API contracts. So what kind of comes next? Like, as the APIs are now becoming solid, underneath that pinnings, we have Linux, we have POSIX, underpinning what Kubernetes does. So what comes after Kubernetes?
The answer lies in the complaints. When people that are approaching Kubernetes for the first time, they say, this thing is too complex, it should do blank.
Yeah.
And the people that step up and go one step beyond complaining, which is trying to solve, they end up creating it. What's the saying goes, like, it's easy to predict the future when you're working on it. And I remember when I was at Puppet Labs, the software developers got involved and they created Docker. So here we are, Chef, Puppet, Ansible, and they were like, but why?
Yeah.
And I think what comes after this is, I have something I want to do. I want to train this model.
Yep.
What is the API that lets me train this model? And I think those people that solve it that way, Kubernetes gets buried just like Kubernetes buries Docker, Docker buries Linux. And I think now that we have this platform, this SDK, if you will, to answer that question in the future will be, no. Let's just build an API that does what people want. And if we have to use Kubernetes underneath, so be it. And I think people think there's going to be like one to rule them all.
Yeah, I don't.
Like one Cloud Foundry, one new Heroku, but more powerful this time. I don't think that happens. I think we end up in the world where we are. Like, you can go to a grocery store, and if you're a great chef, you can probably buy things in a grocery store and make whatever dish you want at home. Most people don't possess those skills.
Right.
Most people want restaurants. We want our Thai restaurants, our Italian restaurants, and they all have their own curated menus. And we don't all like the same restaurants for whatever reason. And there are thousands, if not millions, of restaurants.
That represents another abstraction over expertise.
Exactly, and I think platforms end up in this way. So I think what we'll see is hundreds for sales, Cloudflare workers. And a lot of people are like, well, it doesn't solve everything because it's not supposed to.
It's not supposed to. It's supposed to solve this set of users' problems. I like that focus on solving people's problems. That's really useful, especially because that's one of the, I think, things that people struggle with when they first encounter Kubernetes is like, well, this solves someone's problem, but I have this business problem I need to solve. So how does it solve that? And maybe that's why we start to see these products now that are emerging.
I know it's so hard for people that work in like tech and ops and platform engineering. And that question is kind of like this thing that kind of disrupts the flow and the energy that goes into this work. Because when people say, well, what business problem does TCP IP solve? You're like, listen, I get the question. I get the fundamentals of that question. But what business problem does a typewriter solve?
Right.
You still need to craft the narrative. The typewriter just lets you put it to the page. That's still a separate responsibility. But the typewriter must exist before the message can get printed. And I think Kubernetes is like this necessary evil underneath the cover. A lot of the things we're trying to solve involves software. Software runs somewhere.
Yep.
And if I could tell you how this solves business problem, then maybe I should be the CEO.
Right.
But since I'm not,
Why aren't you?
Let me build the typewriter.
But I think you probably should be the CEO then.
I think there is a world where we say, how do we get people that are building these products and services to get closer to that business problem?
Yeah.
Or at least to the people that are trying to help solve them. And in some ways, I do think we got to protect people from that question sometimes. Like, yes, your company would like to use AI to improve their applications and services. But in order to build custom models, unfortunately, you're going to need some infrastructure.
Yep.
And our goal is to try to make that infrastructure easiest to use as possible so you can do that.
Yeah, I often describe that as undifferentiated lifting, right? That's a lot of what Kubernetes is doing is taking and slicing and dicing my boxes so I can get better efficiency in running my applications. That's not actually the goal. That's just along the way of delivering my product.
I mean, the questions I'm asking these days are, do we even need all of this stuff?
Right. Well, they don't know what they need because they're focused on business problems, which is what we're supposed to do, right? My business selling, well, actually pretty low level infrastructure project.
Example. I'm updating Kubernetes the hard way. And to maintain that guide, I start from 0 all the way up. And as I'm assembling the pieces and documenting, I'm like, do we really need this logging daemon and the 50 other ones? Do we really need this agent to do what it's doing?
Yeah.
When is the time change that we consolidate this thing into a new thing? And so that's the question I'm asking is like, hey, when does this run its course? When do we need to kind of step back and do some analysis? Because when KubeCon started, there's like 6 of these booths.
Right.
2023, there's like 200 of these booths.
Yeah.
Do we need all of these things?
Somebody needs them. I think the market's the pie has grown bigger over these years too, right? There's more and more, I think more and more companies are realizing that there are no companies left that are not tech companies. And so now they're starting to look and go, okay, now I have to take on this tech. Some of them are reaching for the higher level cloud services like FAS and even like low code solutions. But for anybody who's really serious, all of a sudden now there's this solution like Kubernetes and a lot of the stuff these folks are selling that makes it easier to access that value that Kubernetes brings. Again, my thing coming back to is so they can focus on delivering their business value.
The reason why I ask this question is that those that are asking that question will probably create the thing that supersedes it.
Yeah.
I was very surprised that Docker didn't come from the sysadmins. It came from the people who didn't want to do sysadmin work.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious to myself that people that look at all of this and say, do we need it? And they say, maybe not. And they create this other thing. And so I'm always keeping my eye out for what is that other thing? Now, the answer could be, yes, we need it. It just has to get layered on top of, like Linux is being layered on top of today. But I still think it's a question that keeps me intellectually honest to say, hey, when do we need to step back and re-examine the situation?
I think it's kind of fundamental engineering, though. Like, we're just kind of bringing it higher in the stack to say, you ain't going to need it.
It should be.
It should be. So you mentioned, like, sometimes as technical folks, we tend to be very focused on the technology. And very often in my work, what I have to do is get my engineers to look up and go, what are we actually trying to do here? And so what are some of the ways you do that with the folks around you?
I mean, it depends because I just bought a house in a new subdivision and I look out the window as they're building the other houses. And those people come in and it's like we have the blueprint and we're all on the same page. The person that does the foundation, they do their job and leave. No stand-up, no collaboration. This is the 100th foundation this person has put in place. They know the laws, they know the rules, and the inspector will come check the work, and they understand that it needs to meet code. And then all the other people come in until the house is complete. And like clockwork, they can do this time and time again. And that level of professionalism and expertise, and I sometimes wonder, when we have people that are specialists in our field, how much protection should we give them so they can kind of focus? Because sometimes you want to take big ideas and break them down into boring plans that the people can execute. Sometimes people just want to come in and just like, listen, we want authorization. I know how to do that. Let me do that. And ideally, I don't need to be involved in all of these things, not for all of the things. Some things are complex enough where we do need to have everyone in the room because we've never done it before and we have to figure it out for the first time. But I do wish we can get to a point where the professionals can literally focus and double down to get to that level of professionalism where they can go execute this way. I watch a lot of people in this industry that get distracted way too early from being able to get to that level because their calendar's filled with random stand-ups and no mentoring.
Yeah.
Maybe we can balance that out a little bit. So I do think it would be nice if leaders understood that formula of taking big ideas and turning them into blueprints that people can execute on. And when they can't, admitting that we don't have that level of clarity. So don't say digital transformation. Don't say DevOps.
Right.
And paper over the fact that
they
needs to happen.
struggle with that, though, right? Like a lot of leaders, the very awake ones, I think, still struggle with it, but they're better at doing it, which is you kind of have to let go of some control to do things that way, right? Like to not have the foreman lording over the guy pouring the foundation every moment and doing stand-ups every 5 minutes. Like these, like our engineers are sitting there like, I just want to do my job. Can you please at least leave me alone? But in our corporations,
approach the problem with clarity. Don't say we're here to transform the business, something DevOps.
Right.
And I'm sitting here like, I don't know what you're saying.
Right.
Now, if we have a business problem, meaning the service we run is too expensive to run at these numbers, the world has changed. We used to charge $10 for a stock trade. Now it's $0, and we got to get our stack to be cheaper now. I can work with that.
Yeah.
Right? I can figure that out. What I can't work with is we need to transform our business. Like, sure.
To what?
Yeah. Now I need you to give me more input. So as part of that feedback is like, listen, here's what we can charge for this thing. Here's what it costs to operate. Can you make numbers shrink? And as an engineer, it's like, you know what? I might be able to do that.
Yeah.
Right? We may have to change our database technology. We might even have to actually think about compression on the wire to cut the networking bill down.
Right.
But now at least I have justification for making these kind of decisions. But I think a lot of people are left vague.
Yeah, and sometimes intentionally so, right? Like, because when you're vague, it's really hard to hold you accountable.
True.
So to go back to the foundation, I think one of the other reasons why that works so well is you mentioned that you were observing. You're looking out your window and you're seeing a foundation be poured, and then you see the studs come in. And so I wonder if part of the secret of why that work can be done with less supervision is that it's easy to observe that the results are coming out the way you expect them to. So I wonder if there's an angle around talking about observability here and its role in kind of the growth of all of this ecosystem that we're participating in here.
You know, one of the things that I think the practice of SRE, site reliability engineering, brought was, for some people, just that concept of a service level agreement, an SLA. And when you say, listen, we have this service that processes credit cards. Without the concept of an SLA, we just try to keep it running forever, and hopefully it never goes down. And if it goes down, we will just wake up on call and fix it. And then that becomes the culture of firefighting.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that SRE mentality is a bit more strategic, where you say, how often should it be up?
Right.
Our customers only need 2 nights. Why are we over-engineering for 5? And I think that is good engineering. And that's the part where you can say, hey, yo, we built enough, and let's make sure that we manage it within expectation. So if you only need a 2-bedroom house, why are we building a skyscraper right now?
Yeah.
And I think that level of discipline in our field allows us to do that. So sometimes we don't need to work in software is like unbounded context.
Right.
When you bring in things like SLAs and APIs, I think that's the structure to let us know when to stop.
Yeah.
And I think that's the kind of stuff that we need. So yeah, I think it is getting better. And I think these ideas, when we give them words like site reliability engineering, and the practice becomes less about on-call and more about this service level agreement.
Yeah.
And the work we do to make those agreements and hold ourselves accountable to them, I think that is that engineering that allows people to kind of build and stay within a framework where the handoff points are nice enough that people can build the rest of the house.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And you mentioned SLAs, SLOs. The other thing I really like pointing out to people with those is there's the saying we only need to build 99%, but there's also the danger in building a 5.9 system, and that your customers will build against that 5.9s, and obviously now they're fragile in ways that they don't, and now they have fundamental surprises, well, that they don't expect. That's the definition of fundamental surprise.
Yeah, I think that idea of making sure your customers don't get spoiled. I remember when Amazon first came out, they would randomly restart VMs because they told you.
I remember that.
Do not put your estate on this thing because at any point, this thing is ephemeral and it could go away. And if no one's ever had a thing reboot on them in 2 years, you start building up cruft on that thing.
Yeah.
So I think this thing around error budgets, and I think that was kind of what you're hinting at here, is like making sure you actually hold yourself. Like if you said 3 nines, that means you can actually have way more maintenance in Windows than someone that is only doing 5.9 service. Also,
or you burn that 9 off in a chaos exercise.
Also, Apple takes their site down when they launch new products. If Apple can say, hey, the site is down because we're doing stuff, you probably can too.
Probably, yeah. But convincing leadership to do it is a whole different matter. Well, Kelsey, it's been lovely chatting with you. Thank you for stopping by, and I hope you have a great KubeCon.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
All right.